So good morning, everybody. Welcome to another of the second of our Zoom lectures this season. And thank you for funding with your registration fees all the Netanya projects that support underprivileged communities here. Once again, I'll just go over the sort of regulations that we have. Everybody will be muted, except, of course, the lecturer. Any questions you have, please put them into the chat at the bottom of the screen, and we'll answer them at the end of the lecture. If you want to see the speaker on the screen, choose speaker view at the top right of your screen. It might be a sort of better way to see any slides that Lyn has. And we will be recording this lecture so that it'll be available for 7 days from the date of this lecture. Now, let me introduce today's lecturer, Lyn Julius, who's going to be talking about who owns the Middle East Jewish heritage. And Lyn is a British-born daughter of Iraqi Jewish refugees, graduated in international relations from the University of Sussex, and is a widely read journalist and blogger. Lyn is a co-founder of Harif, which some of you might have heard. It's the Association in the United Kingdom of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. Harif arranges talks and film screenings, which are now shown on the internet. It also advocates for the rights of Jewish ex-refugees from Arab countries and Iran. Lyn's book, called Uprooted, Our 3,000 Years of Jewish Civilization in the Arab World, Vanished Overnight, was published in 2018. So let's go straight away to our subject for today. Over to you, Lyn.
Well, thank you very much, Susan. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you, all of you, for joining me. I will just share my screen. Thank you very much. So just to say a little bit about Harif, which is an organization of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. You don't have to be one to join our mailing list. Just go to our website, which is www.harif.org, and we're doing Zoom lectures. We've been doing them since the pandemic started. We've done over 50, and you're all very welcome to join. Now, the main objective of Harif, as Susan explained, was really to raise awareness through our lectures, through education, of the almost 1 million Jewish refugees who had to leave Arab and Muslim countries after 1948. So 1 million Jews in 1948, today barely 4,000. And this is really the greatest story never told when people discuss the Arab-Israeli conflict. We always hear about Palestinians, but we never hear about the Jews. So we need everybody really in the Jewish community and beyond to talk about the Jewish refugees, to talk about their lost heritage, and to kind of correct the narrative which we feel has been distorted. So the subject of my talk today is who owns the Middle East Jewish heritage? And the question is, to whom does Jewish heritage belong now that all the Jews have gone? There are two sorts of Jewish heritage. There's immovable heritage, like synagogues, schools, and hospitals, and cemeteries. And the Jews abandoned all this, just as they did homes, offices, shops, and land. These Jews were mostly denationalized. That is to say, they were stripped of their citizenship, making it impossible for them to recover their property, nor did they receive compensation. Many cities in the Middle East and North Africa were heavily Jewish. For instance, Baghdad had proportionately more Jews than Warsaw or New York. There were dozens of synagogues in these cities, 53 in Baghdad, for instance. These are communal property, but in the Arab world, it was not uncommon for families to build private synagogues and make them available for the use of the community. And here I have some examples of Jewish heritage. The top left picture is of the synagogue, the great synagogue in Oran in Algeria, which is now a mosque. The top right picture is of the great synagogue in Tunis, beautiful modernist building, which actually was restored after it was damaged in the 1967 riots. It's actually still a working synagogue, although there are barely a few hundred Jews living in Tunis. You've got the beautiful Yemenite filigree rimonim, bottom left, and the picture bottom right is of the inside of Ezekiel's tomb. And this place was actually a very popular place of pilgrimage when Jews lived in Iraq. And you can still see the original Hebrew inscriptions that surround the burial chamber of the prophet Ezekiel. But that has now been turned into a Shiite mosque. And there's very little left of its sort of original Jewish character. So what happened to the synagogues? Some have been destroyed, as you see here. This is the tomb of Jonah in the north of Iraq, which was destroyed in 2014 when Islamic State overran Iraq. And the reason why they did this was obviously because they want to erase all trace of any heritage that is not Muslim. And they're doing it also because they want to monopolize, people's memories. So people will say that Jews never lived in these countries, and this is all part of this power struggle to dominate. And what you do is you erase, other people's memories, other people's history. And some synagogues have been converted to mosques, as we saw, to other uses like sports gyms or even private homes. But recently there's been a trend to, this is another synagogue that actually was destroyed, beautiful synagogue outside Damascus called the Jobar Synagogue, which by tradition was the shrine of the prophet Elijah. And the site was bombed in 2014 during the Syrian civil war. And as you can see, nothing is left of it. So destruction is one thing. You've got synagogues that are crumbling to dust, like this one here, which was the main synagogue in Tripoli in Libya. And in 2011, a very brave Jew called David Jerby actually went to Libya, and he wanted to pray in this Dar al-Bishi synagogue. And here you see him. It was over Rosh Hashanah. There are no Jews left in Libya. So he made a valiant attempt to open up what's left of this synagogue, but the authorities accused him of violating an archaeological site, and he was forced to leave in a hurry. Lately, he's been fighting a plan to turn the synagogue into an Islamic center. So a lot of Jewish heritage has actually been allowed to crumble to dust or has been destroyed, or roads have been built over Jewish cemeteries. this sort of thing. But other synagogues have actually been restored, such as this one. And Morocco has for some time been restoring synagogues, Jewish quarters, and it's actually restored 137 Jewish cemeteries. And this is an absolutely gorgeous example of a synagogue in Fez. This is the most recent example of a restored synagogue in Morocco. It's called Beit Dakira, which is a synagogue converted into a museum, and $1.5 million was spent restoring it. It was opened in 2020, just before the pandemic. And here you see the Jewish advisor to the Moroccan king. His name is Andre Azoulay, and he's made it his mission, if you like, to improve relations between Jews and Morocco. This has been going on for decades now, and the restoration of Jewish heritage is part of what he of his strategy, if you like. So this particular museum is in Essaouira, where in fact Andre Azoulay's family comes from. But I don't think we can envisage a revival of Jewish life in Morocco, because there are 3 Jews still living in Essaouira. There's not enough for a minyan. Obviously, there'll be more interest, in visiting Morocco now that the Abraham Accords have been signed. There are 40,000 tourists Jewish tourists who visit Morocco every year. 3,000 of those are Israelis, and we can expect more Jews to come and visit. But I am a bit pessimistic about whether the community will revive. There are only about 1,500 Jews still living in Morocco. So Egypt has listed 10 synagogues as historic monuments and has restored 3, the Ben Ezra, the Maimonides, and the Karaite synagogue. And all but 2 synagogues were sold off by the community in Alexandria. Now, the Egyptian government has cottoned on to the value of restoration. One recent example has been the restoration of the Nebi Daniel synagogue in Alexandria, which recently won an international award. And here you see a picture from the official inauguration of this synagogue, which took place just before the pandemic hit. Now, what's interesting about this is that here are the assembled officials of the Egyptian government, the Ministry of Heritage and Antiquities, the Ministry of Tourism. Not a single Jew among them. Actually, there were a couple of Jews, I think, in the audience, representing about 50% of the remaining Jewish community, which obviously is not a community anymore, just a few elderly ladies. So I think that makes it clear the government was not interested in having live Jews attend the inauguration. This is purely to promote tourism. Now, tourism is something which governments have increasingly been interested in. But what they've done really is restored empty buildings with no Jews in them. And I don't know if you've heard of a novelist called Dara Horn. She recently wrote a book called People Love Dead Jews. And in it, she says that when she visits these restored Jewish heritage sites, wherever they may be, in Spain or in China or in the Arab world, she feels a sense of anger, a sense of rage, because Jews are expected to show appreciation and gratitude for the restoration of these sites, but nobody says anything about the fact that no Jews live in these places anymore, and that often their property was stolen from them, and they were expelled, sometimes quite brutally. So no Jews at the inauguration of the Eliyahu Hanavi Synagogue. So this is an exterior view. It's actually the largest synagogue in the Middle East, absolutely beautiful Italianate synagogue. So the Jews decided to have their own inauguration, and this took place in February 2020. And I don't know if any of you know the lady in the middle there. She is the leader or the president of the Association of Jews from Egypt in Israel, a remarkable lady called Levana Zamir, and her daughter standing beside her. And the rabbi came from Italy, and he is descended from Egyptian Jews. There was a very emotional occasion. About 180 Jews came from all over the Egyptian diaspora, and they had a service in the synagogue. They visited the cemetery, and it was a very moving experience. Here's another example of restoration. It's the Magen Raham Synagogue in Beirut, one of 16 in the city. It was badly damaged during the Lebanese civil war and was recently restored by a consortium of Jewish businessmen. It got a grant from an engineering company called Solidaire, and there was an underlying political purpose here, and that was to show that Lebanon was still home to various sects, all enjoying equal rights. But as soon as it was renovated, the synagogue was closed. It was slightly damaged in the big explosion that occurred last year. But there are no Jews in Lebanon. There is no prospect of this synagogue ever hosting a minyan. So we come to moveable heritage. Now, moveable heritage is another matter, and it would seem a matter of justice to return artifacts to their rightful owners. I mean, this is actually possible. Movable heritage, too, however, is being declared the cultural heritage of the country concerned. So what does international law have to say about this? The law governing Jewish heritage or any heritage in Arab countries really is the Hague Convention of 1954. The picture shows a detail of the Elgin marbles, which I'm sure you've all heard of. And the Elgin marbles are an interesting case because they're being claimed back by Greece. They're part of the Elgin marbles are now in the British Museum. These marbles were actually sold to Lord Elgin. And the Hague Convention of 1954 was passed really to protect cultural property in the event of armed conflict. And it was brought in to stop the massive looting that has always occurred in war, and specifically during World War II. And there's a sort of post-colonial understanding that the new states that emerged in the 20th century have ownership of their cultural heritage. Hence, Greece has been asking for the British Museum Elgin marbles to be returned to it. But the question is, when is heritage not national heritage? And I think what we see really is that the law does not really reflect the reality, which is that some heritage does not actually belong to the nation concerned, but it belongs to a minority that has since been expelled or is in exile. The position regarding Sifrei Torah, for instance, apparently the rabbi of Ramat Gan says that Torah scrolls belong only to Am Yisrael. Fleeing Jews have been known to take scrolls and books with them. And there are laws that say it is forbidden to buy or sell Sifrei Torah. Egypt bans the export of artifacts over 100 years old because it considers anything over 100 years old to be part of its national heritage. Torah scrolls are therefore classified as antiquities, like the Elgin marbles. And these artifacts were actually intercepted. The government announced that they'd intercepted a smuggling ring and made a big deal of it. The authorities in Egypt are actually particularly paranoid that the Jews might come back and claim their property, or that they are engaged in smuggling deeds or artifacts. And this picture was taken in 2014 when the Egyptian press announced that the authorities had intercepted this trove of Torah scrolls, crowns, and finials in a coastal port. The hoard was bound for Belgium. The attitude in Egypt really is that Torah scrolls belong to a kind of now defunct ancient civilization. And here you see two Egyptian Torah scrolls in a glass case at the New Cairo Museum, which was opened recently. And opposite those scrolls were Egyptian mummies. So basically, Egypt classifies Torah scrolls, in the same way as it classifies mummies, even though, ancient Egypt, has not existed for thousands of years. But Torah scrolls obviously can still be part of living communities. They can still be used. And the people you see in the picture, there is President Sisi there wearing the white face mask. And the lady is Andre Azoulai's daughter, Audrey. Audrey Azoulai is now the Director General of UNESCO. And I don't recall any report of her, protesting at the fact that there were Torah scrolls in the New Cairo Museum or anything. Obviously, she, as a diplomat, she feels it's not her place to question anything. But I do find it's an irony that she should be, part of this whole effort to preserve Jewish heritage as a sort of artifact in the same way as Egyptian mummies are preserved. Here is an example of a Torah scroll that the Tunisian authorities intercepted. They say that it was being smuggled out of the country. And invariably, they say that these Torah scrolls are very old. I'm not saying it's necessarily a good thing to smuggle Torah scrolls and other Judaica, because they will probably end up on the black market. And The British Museum, for instance, returned a huge haul of Iraqi artefacts dating back thousands of years to Iraq because they were illegally removed or smuggled out of the country. And this is an example of Judaic or Jewish books found in the market in Sana'a in Yemen. And you also find Judaica in the markets in Morocco, for instance, or in Turkey. In Yemen, the last Jews to leave Israel in 2016 brought out a scroll with them. Often the scrolls bear the name of the individual or family who donated it to the synagogue. The rabbi concerned said that the scroll had been in the family for generations, and Netanyahu posed with the scroll. There was quite a lot of publicity in the press. The authorities in Yemen then arrested 2 Jews on charges of smuggling Yemeni heritage out of the country. One is still in jail. Let's see, that's him. His name is Levi Selam Marhabi. Apparently his health has deteriorated considerably. There is a campaign being run by the American Sephardi Federation to have him released. There's quite a lot of pressure from the Americans, but so far to no avail. These are communal records and documents seized by the government in Egypt. So Egypt classifies communal records as part of the national heritage. And they won't even let Jews photocopy circumcision, death, or marriage certificates. An organization called Nebi Daniel, based in Paris, has been campaigning for access for over a decade or more. They don't even want access to the original documents. They would be content to have a copy. And you can see how important it is for Egyptian Jews to have documentary evidence of their identity, because these archives contain circumcision, marriage, and death records. And the contents of 2 Jewish libraries were seized and carted off to the Egyptian National Archives. The same happened in Alexandria. The person who kind of has presided over this has been the so-called communal leader, Magda Haroun. She presides over a community of 6. And she's proved to be willing to do the government's bidding. And she's actually called for Jewish property to be bequeathed to the Egyptian state. And she's proposed that 2 synagogues in Cairo be turned into cultural centers. And under her nose, the contents of 2 Jewish libraries were seized and carted off to the Egyptian National Archives. This hasn't happened to any other community in Egypt. The Protestants, the Armenians, the Greek Orthodox, none of them have been affected in this way. And Magda has revived a charity called the Goutte de Lait, which historically helped young Jewish mothers. She inserted a new bylaw in its constitution to allow the charity to restore and preserve Jewish heritage. Some 500 artifacts have been registered, and there's a cataloguing operation underway. Of all the volunteers who are helping in this, only 1 is a Jew. The rest have no knowledge of Hebrew. And that obviously would be very important because a lot of these documents are in Hebrew. And this is very problematic. In February of 2019, there appeared to be a breakthrough about this business of communal Jewish records not being released to Egyptian Jews. 24 Orthodox Jewish leaders from the US visited Egypt and were given a private audience with President Sisi himself. Sisi promised to clean up the Basatin cemetery in Cairo. And there was also talk of establishing a museum of Jewish heritage in a synagogue just outside Cairo, in which records might be consulted. Progress at last. And when asked about restituting Torah scrolls by one Jewish leader, Sisi said they were being well cared for and they would not need to leave the country. And when it comes to repair and restoration of synagogues, Jewish organizations outside Egypt have raised funds, but the Sisi government has decided that Egypt, although it is cash poor, will be in sole charge of funding repairs. He wants Jews to return to Egypt, and he said he would build synagogues for them. And his attitude really tells us something very interesting, that he sees Jews as Egyptian citizens of the Jewish faith, and he doesn't want outside Jewish organizations such as the American Jewish Committee to have a stake in Jewish heritage. And Magda, the head of the community, who's a fervent anti-Zionist, has said she opposes accepting foreign funds on the grounds that most Jewish associations interested in making donations are supportive of Israel. So this policy of treating Jewish property as national heritage sets a dangerous precedent. Magda Haroun has revealed that she has written to the Egyptian government to demand that 4 paintings owned by an Egyptian Jew who died in France during World War II and are now in the Louvre be returned to Egypt. So where will it end? The Egyptian state could end up claiming all property owned by Jews from Egypt, even if they live abroad. By far the most famous case of Jewish property being claimed by an Arab country is the case of the Iraqi Jewish Archive. Now, just to give you a little background on this, the Iraqi Jewish Archive was a collection of thousands of documents and books belonging to the Jewish community of Iraq, and it was discovered in the basement of the secret police headquarters in Baghdad in 2003. Now, these documents had actually been sitting in 4 feet of water because the Americans had bombed the building and the water system burst. And the Americans felt so guilty about this that they decided to collect the documents, which were in a very bad state, as you can see, and ship them over to America for restoration. And this was done in 2003. And the highlights of what they found in this collection were put on display in an exhibition, which then went round America. Now, the American government actually signed an agreement that the whole archive would go back to Iraq once the restoration had been completed. Now, the Iraqi Jewish community who are now living outside Iraq were absolutely up in arms because they said it was their property. In fact, the stuff had been stolen by Saddam Hussein's regime from a synagogue. And they said that the Iraqis really have no interest in this. And it should stay in America or in fact be restored to Iraqi Jews living outside Iraq. The situation today is very unclear. We know the Iraqis have asked for the archive to come back, but if it did come back, obviously Jews would not be able to consult it, and also it might be at risk of being bombed, and it is not a satisfactory situation. The situation at the moment is that the Iraqis, that the Americans have not returned the archive. It is still in, this is the oldest item, which dates back to 1568. And here is another item that actually has a connection to my family. My ancestor was a printer of Hebrew books in Baghdad, and this is one of the books that he printed. So at the moment, the archive is sitting in America. It hasn't yet been returned to Iraq. Now, like the Torah scrolls that we saw earlier, you know, Torah scrolls can be part of a living community. And these school certificates that were found in the archive actually belong to living people. Like this girl, little girl, whose school report you see here is still alive. And I'm sure she would very much like to keep her school certificate. The Iraqi government also retains a number of Torah scrolls. Apparently there are over 300 in the basement of the National Museum. This is one Torah scroll that actually made it from Iraq to Israel in 2003. It was sort of smuggled out through Jordan. But we now have another problem, which is another worrying development in recent years, and that is that the American government has been signing memoranda of understanding with various Arab governments, for instance, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Libya, Yemen, and Algeria. And these memoranda of understanding say that Arab governments can retain items of heritage, and even more alarming, that they can demand artifacts that are outside the country to be returned. So these are all examples of Jewish artifacts that are now in museums in America or in Europe, and it is not inconceivable for these governments to actually ask for these items to be returned. So what are we to do about this whole question? Well, my organization, Harif, actually had a Zoom discussion. Is there a legal avenue for the Jewish communities to go down? Should they sue for the return of their artifacts? We had three leading lawyers. One of them was Nitzana Darshan Leitner. Another was Nat Lewin. And they all seem to agree that even if you win a case in the courts, there is no way of actually enforcing a judgment. I'll give you an example. Chabad in New York wanted a library that was in Moscow and was claimed by the Russian government to be restored to it. They went to court, they won the case, but the library is still in Moscow. And although the Russian government, has been accumulating fines for not complying with the judgment, there is actually nothing one can do to persuade the Russian government to send the Chabad library to New York. And so perhaps the best option is diplomacy, to use leverage with Arab governments to try and persuade them to release Jewish heritage to its rightful owners. So on that note, I will finish, and very happy to answer questions. How do I get stop share? Stop share. Yeah, I'll just stop my share. Okay. Can't hear you.
Sorry, I muted myself. Yeah. Sorry. Well, thanks very much, Lyn. Are there any questions, Ros?
No, I cannot see any questions. I'm still open to people who, if anybody wants to. I think Larry wants to say something.
Yes, I do. Lyn was saying that in Egypt there's a law that after 100 years, an artifact belongs to Egypt because it's considered historical. Historical equipment. So on that basis, considering that, from my understanding, most of the Jewish community left Egypt just after the 6-Day War. Is that not correct?